You're on mute, Rustam.
Ah, is it? Well,
Can
now I
you
think
any?
I'm audible.
You're
I'm
audible.
audible, but my video has gone off. It's okay.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
nothing much to see in my face.
Okay.
If the video comes on, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll continue. Is that okay?
Please.
So, Amit, shall I continue or do you want to try putting on my video? Okay, let it be. Fine. Hello, folks. I'm Rustam Modi, although my name may show as Yasmin Modi. That's my sister's Zoom I'm joining from. So, I'm just going to say a few words for the speaker today, Professor Ravi Ravindra. I suppose many of you know him, maybe you all know him better than me. Just a few words. Professor Ravi Ravindra, or as he is known in India more affectionately as Ravi Ji, has had many of the great teachers of the last century as who he has worked very closely with, Krishnamurti, Roshi Kabori, Madam Jean de Salzman, and so on. There's much to see and talk about that, which you'll find on the net in his books. I won't say much on that. Among the thousands of students who he has taught, I happen to be one of them. And I have been studying with him for some 20 years, and I thought I'll say a few words on those 20 years. So I studied with him under the aegis of what is called the Gurdjieff system, though he talks under many different formats, and I don't think he is stuck in any one such. It may be better if I just, even if it may be a bit presumptuous, if I may summarize what I think has been the course of his life as I have understood it and of his search. When he was a young boy, his father recited to him a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. That verse can be recited by any of us, but beyond recitation, there is a long way to go. The verse is Bahunam Janma Manante Jnanavatma Prapatyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha. Now, something about the way his father told it to him, and something about the content of the verse, which is a very mysterious verse. It talks about a very simple teaching that Vasudeva is everything. And yet it also says it is Durlabha, which is it's a very hard to understand this teaching. So it's both very simple and very hard. Something about it became the guiding theme of Raviji's life. And in a way, all his life he has sought to understand this thing that all is Krishna. So from this first stage, which is what in India we may call the bhakti stage of looking at Krishna as God, he went on to what we typically call it as a jnani stage, where you try to understand what is this content, what, and you start trying to probe in the direction of what is Krishna and what am I are two sides of the same question. Beyond this jnani stage is a very difficult to explicate stage where you don't even have emotions or thoughts about it, but you just start realizing it in your body and in the kitchen when cutting vegetables, in talking with others. What would it mean to keep a remembrance of Krishna all the time? So that is where he came to the Gurdjieff system and the sense or the idea of paying attention to the sensations in the body. And this is where I discovered him. And I remember in our first meeting, he talked of the importance of sensation. And I did not pay any attention. I did not think it's very important. And now, 20 years later, with a difficult time on all of us, I request him to take heed of poor students like me and once again instruct us in how to pay attention to the sensations which may be more authentic than our emotions, which are more authentic than our thoughts. Uh, Beyond that, I think I have spoken enough. Raviji, please take over.
Thank you very much. Let me welcome all the participants. And I will begin, first of all, reminding all of us of some obvious facts, which I don't think any of us can, in fact, deny, but we don't often remember them. One is the simple reminder from all our astrophysicists these days that there are trillions of galaxies in the universe, and we are in a very ordinary galaxy. And even there, we are not at the center of that galaxy. We are on a little planet around a very peripheral star in this ordinary galaxy. If one can take a few moments to reflect on this, one would hardly imagine that I am the center of the universe. It's a very large universe. But this particular realization that I am not the center of the universe itself already invites certain kind of serious inquiry. But let me also mention one or two other very simple, obvious truths. That the whole universe and everything in it, including you and I, are being run by extremely delicate laws. Over the centuries, great scientists have discovered many of these laws, but guaranteedly in the next 100 years or 1000 years, we have very smart scientists. They will discover additional information about the universe. But much more importantly, a simple reminder that I did not create myself. Personally, for me, if I can actually come back to this one particular sentence even once a day, it very much affects my feelings and my inquiry. Simple reminder that I did not create myself. I would have no idea how to create this whole apparatus that can be alive. And we have an ordinary linguistic habit of saying, I am breathing. But if one spends even one moment thinking about it, I did not create this breathing apparatus. I would have no idea how to start breathing or not to start breathing. I am being breathed. And here, it's a good thing to remember, and I would now speak about certain enunciations by the great sages throughout human history, naturally speaking in different languages with different backgrounds, so their words are not always exactly the same. But among those general suggestions are a few items which are necessary for us to consider. One is that there are many levels of reality subtler than the body and the mind. That is almost really the meaning from their perspective to say that there are spiritual realms of reality. But if one does not dismiss this suggestion, and this is from all the sages in the history of humanity, then in order to connect with these levels which are subtler than the body and the mind, very strong invitation to quieten the mind. Some of you may be familiar with Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, for example. It's the second sutra in the first chapter, but the very first really substantial sutra. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is stopping all the movements of the mind. And sometimes this is expressed actually very strongly. For example, Madame Blavatsky, who initiated the whole Theosophical Society, makes a very strong statement. Mind is the slayer of the truth. In fact, even Raman Maharshi speaks about the requirement of manonash, as if the mind needs to be slain, it needs to be destroyed. I think that may be expressing it perhaps a little too strongly, but a reminder, nevertheless, that the truth that the spiritual sages are speaking about is not discovered by the mind. Then, of course, the spiritual realm is very large. Some of you would know in the Bible, for example, there are 9 orders of angels. They're all spiritual. Similarly, in the Indian traditions, we have many devas. In fact, the first deva in the Rig Veda is Agni, but the highest deva is Surya, the sun. And therefore, there are many, many levels of reality subtler than the mind, and they can all be labeled as spiritual. And then this another enunciation from all these sages that the entire universe, including you and I, are created by the highest level of consciousness, naturally labeled differently, Brahma, God, Allah, the Absolute, or simply that. Because all the sages also say that it is almost impossible to actually describe this in any kind of intellectual manner. What is the nature of this highest reality? But many things get attached to this, such as in India, Sat Chit Anand, truth, consciousness, delight. Elsewhere, for example, particularly in all the remarks of Christ, the word love is very much attached to this. In fact, a very important remark of first letter of John, God is love. Not that God is loving, that is easier to understand, but that the very structure of God is love. So many things are said about the nature of this highest reality, but always implying that it cannot really be captured by the mind. Then very strong other suggestion that the life energy enters into us through our breath. We say our breath, but it is really not my breath. I didn't decide to create this breath or this air that I need to breathe to stay alive, or the breathing apparatus. As I said earlier, I am being breathed. So very strong suggestion. In fact, this is almost exactly the remark in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. That is the breath of God which is keeping me alive. And in an old Upanishad actually says, Pranavai Brahma. Prana. Unfortunately, the English word breath these days does not carry the richness that is still carried by the Chinese word chi or the Sanskrit word prana. It is meant to be a connecting link between all levels of reality. In fact, the word breath or the word for breath in practically all ancient languages, for example, in Sanskrit, Chinese, Hebrew, it is either exactly the same as the word spirit or very close to it. So, in fact, I would now invite us all to take a few moments to pay attention to our breath. That actually can assist slightly quieting the mind. And a simple reminder, which I have already said, that the whole creation, including you and I, exist by involution, coming from the highest level of consciousness. Then the universe is obviously manifested at very different levels of consciousness. Mosquitoes have a different level of consciousness than human beings, than monkeys, than plants. So I am being breathed, and then very strong suggestion, more or less an obvious implication, that these levels of energies which have created me or created the whole universe are at a level much more conscious, much more intelligent than I am. Therefore, if I wish to connect with that level, I cannot command something or make a demand. But is it possible for me to become more and more receptive? And just paying a little attention to your breathing, the other suggestion which naturally follows to become receptive is deeper and deeper relaxation. Emotional relaxation is in fact much more important than physical relaxation. It's the emotions which actually set us into motion. So to be a little free of my anxiety or worry or wishing for this or that or fearing anything, another important reminder that any energy, for example, now I'm speaking about emotional energy in me, unless I intentionally try to connect it with something a little subtler feeling, it will naturally be wasted in very low level emotions such as anxiety, resentment, wishing for approval. So if I can even remind myself, obviously I did not create myself. Can I be grateful for the fact that I exist? And then naturally a sense of wonder. Why have these extremely conscious, intelligent, and large forces taken the trouble to create me? And only for a few decades. In fact, this occasion today is very much connected with the life of the Buddha. Let me remind you, was one of the things that started this great searcher. Siddhartha Gautama, in my understanding, is the greatest searcher in human history. But what struck him? To having seen an old man, a sick man, and a dead man. I suspect all of us have seen these things, but he took it very existentially. For him, the reminder that I will die, my son will die, initiated a very deep search. What is the point of being alive? If it is only for a few decades, then one just dies. So to remind myself with a sense of gratitude for the fact that I exist and a sense of wonder, searching, why do I exist? First of all, that takes our feeling energy towards a slightly subtler feeling, which is then not wasted in ordinary emotions. And as I recommended earlier, to pay some attention to your breathing, reminding yourself it's the breath coming from the very highest level. We can label the word God, not to get too occupied with any of these words. It's the breath of God which is keeping me alive. Remaining relaxed. Wishing to slightly quieten my ordinary mind from jumping around, I try to connect this very mobile mind with something which is much more stable, namely my own body. So take a few moments to sense the vertical axis in yourself from the top of the head to the base of the spine. This is the axis along which all the energies in the body actually move. And traditionally, it also gets called the world axis or the axis mundi, along which subtle energies from above myself can enter into me. But I allow the mind to move along this axis rather than fixing it at one point, because it is not accustomed to being completely stationary and will rebel. But I exercise some self-will to prevent it from moving away from the axis. But if it does move away, no need to get reacting against it. The mind also has its function, it has its need. It's like a barking dog trying to keep the house safe because the master is not at home. But when the master is there, the dog will stop barking. So to bring it back to the vertical axis, really more or less with care and attention and love. And without artificially forcing it, I allow the movement of the mind to get coordinated with breathing in and breathing out. As I breathe out, the mind can move down the vertical axis. As I breathe in, it can move up the axis, making sure that I don't hold my breath outside or inside. But it's a very important principle that the simple fact that I pay attention to something changes the quality of that thing. For example, now, if I end up paying some attention to my breathing, without artificially forcing, one would see that the quality of my breathing changes. It naturally deepens. And as I said earlier, that prana or chi is meant to be the connecting link between all levels of reality. So if I breathe with more awareness than usual, I can connect with slightly subtler level than usual. That's the general idea, but not easily simply to buy these things. Many wonderful things are said by the sages. Simply to believe them does not make us searchers. This is why I so highly admire Gautam Buddha, the greatest searcher in human history, willing to sacrifice anything for his search. Then another suggestion, or really a general idea from the spiritual teachings, that this particle of divinity or of Krishna or breath of God, whatever expression speaks to you, has taken on my body and mind for its purposes so that it can undertake the kind of right action in Prakriti, in the world, which can assist the evolution of this particle of divinity, ideally back to the highest level, to be able to say, I am Brahma. Or the remark of Christ, the Father and I are one. That is a very large project. And perhaps in human history, maybe no more than a few dozen of people have possibly come to this. But that is very much the call. For example, again, I use the example or a remark of the Buddha here. Be a lamp unto yourself. Look within. You are the Buddha. The Buddha is not teaching us to become Buddhists, but to find our Buddha nature. And you will find absolutely similar remarks, not in the standard canonized Gospels in Christianity, but for example, Gospel of Philip, a non-canonical Gospel, literally says Christ came not to make us Christian, but to make us Christ. That is the call, not to imagine that it is an easy undertaking, but any searcher will soon discover an absolute necessity of connecting with the community of fellow searchers. Again, if I just use the expression from the Buddhist literature, not only Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, I take refuge in the Buddha and his teaching, Dharma or Dhammam in Pali, but also Sangham Sharanam Gacchami. I take refuge in the community of searchers. So if we don't dismiss some of these remarks from the great sages, but at the same time, not simply to repeat them or to believe them, but to see how does it apply to me? What am I searching? What am I for on this planet? As I said, only for a few decades. How then to actually undertake the search? How to find the appropriate means, the suitable teachings? Everybody moves from where they are, and therefore not every teaching speaks to everybody. One needs to find whatever will assist me. But I wish you all, I don't think we can now continue this quiet work here. I'll be happy to have your own insights or questions answered if you like. I far prefer an exchange. But let me simply remind you again, do keep a little bit of a touch with your breathing, remaining relaxed. Argumentation doesn't lead to any understanding, but can we hear and speak with care, raise your questions, your inquiries, and bring your insights. So we have nearly half an hour for that. I'll be delighted to hear from somebody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raviji. I would now request people that if they would have any questions, one way to go about it to manage on this virtual forum would be that we just either raise your hands or put a note on chat saying you have a question, then you'll be invited to bring it up so that we can do it in a systematic manner. Mostly with the difficulties, we are not able to see everybody at one go, and therefore we'll have to. So if you have any question, either raise your hand, or one thing you could do probably is to put a note on the chat, and we will take it from there. Yeah, Gabriela.
Thank you so much for the beautiful guidance and the very straightforward words. I'm just feel so blessed to be able to be with you so often, and with this community. More and more beautiful community gets revealed. This is another one. I'm in awe. Raviji, could you please speak us a little bit about this particular time? I'm constantly trying to make sense of it. Why did this happen? What is any kind of way how we can settle down in some degree and support whatever is going on?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's good to keep in mind that throughout human history, at any time, there have been disasters. I know this pandemic is creating a particular kind of disaster, but just in fact today, this very morning, in fact starting yesterday, great storms in Odisha in India, and hardly about 10 days ago or less than that even, great storms in Kerala. So killing many people, destroying many houses, glaciers are melting, all kinds of things are taking place. So there is, and actually if you look back even historically, some king with many armies here, there would attack some place, destroy something. This has been throughout human history, disasters. But it is also possible, this is where it can become, see, one thing which has changed very much since the 16th, 17th century, in fact, after the first major scientific revolution, the general human tendency now is, or intellectual tendency, that the causes of everything that is taking place on the planet need to be understood only in terms of factors on the planet. We forget that there are super planetary effects also. That whole idea got gradually diminished, actually. And because they say, well, that's a theosophical idea or a theological idea, where scientific attitude is that we have to look for the causes exactly at the same place where the effects are. Prior to that, causes were always at a higher level than the effects. So there was a fundamental shift. So it is, in any case, not to argue about it, but at least to allow the possibility that there are cosmological forces which are also trying to teach us some lessons. We are, if you look at what goes on among human beings, for example, I am constantly amazed that 1% richest people on the planet own more than 50% of the total wealth of the planet. Now, and what do they mostly do with that wealth? Fancy yachts, private airplanes, and hiring this person, that person, all kinds of sexual enterprises. That's what goes on. So if there were subtler, higher forces, why would they not wish to intervene and to teach us something? So really, all I'm saying is basically to try to understand how then we can ourselves experience or try to at least search for what can be my part to assist whatever I can do. Just to become discouraged or to become tense, to lose energy, that's not going to help. Whatever level I can help, which could even be just one person who is very poor or who is unable to move or do anything, how can I assist? Now, if I have more facilities, more wealth, more time, more energy, then I can assist at a larger level. Okay? But do wonder, how can I assist? That is more helpful, but remaining as relaxed as I can.
Thank you. It was most helpful.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you.
Harshal Katre, you have a question? Do you want to
Yeah,
raise it?
hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Namaste, Raviji. It was indeed a wonderful session. So I understand that there is this higher intelligence which is moving the things around us and doing a lot more than we as individuals can do. Then I wonder why we have been given free will. Why the higher intelligence doesn't, they go ahead and take care of everything on an automated basis. Why we have been given these choices, or let's say paradox of choices.
One of the things that is good for us to realize that everything, whether it's thought or feeling or free will, has many levels. What most of us think is my free will, I'm sorry to say, is not very free. We are being driven by many, many laws and forces and energies. I give a very simple example of this because I saw this even with my own children as they were growing up. When they became early teenagers, they go out of their way to buy jeans which have little holes around the knees. Why? I ask them, they say it's my free will. But then you see, every kid is going through this. We call it free will. We forget that all these social forces are asking us to respond or to react to this. So first of all, I very much question your suggestion that we have free will. I'm not entirely sure how much free will I have. In fact, then the suggestion from the spiritual teachers actually is, in fact, to cultivate the real freedom, not to just simply, what will be the real freedom then? That even if my ordinary social forces are asking me, let us say, if you're in India, I simply don't simply easily buy this example, but I'm constantly struck. Indians would find many faults with everything that Pakistan is doing. And if you go to Pakistan, raise the same question, the trouble is what the Indians are doing. Now, so one can see from beginning from how my attitude is, can I then find more and more this particular example, don't get too attached to it, but in that example, to find what is the truth behind it. And one would actually discover that vast majority of human beings, which by the way also means vast amount of percentage of my time and life, myself also, are subject to very ordinary, strong social forces. We can fantasize that we have free will. But then the suggestion is, can I, in the process of discovering this, in fact, become free of some of these forces which are driving me and can intentionally undertake something? So free will itself is a very tricky thing, because the call from the spiritual perspective is actually to become free of my will, so that my actions can become an instrument of Krishna's will. That is the call in all spiritual teachings. Let me actually give you a very specific example of this. Some of you may be familiar. This is in the Gospel of John, Christ's remark. Well, maybe before that, I should first of all say, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna repeatedly emphasizes what he calls nash karmya, actionlessness. Don't do anything. Now, that doesn't mean inaction, but the call is that can my action carry out the will of Krishna, then carrying out my will. So therefore, this is one of the remarks in the Bhagavad Gita. An accomplished yogi sees that I do nothing at all. It's all being done by me or through me, but not because of my will or my undertaking. So it's really the call is to submit my will to Krishna. And this is now I can quote this remark from John's Gospel, Christ's remark, hardly an ordinary character. I am not the author of the words I say. I say what my Father in heaven tells me to say. So in fact, the whole journey really will be to discover, first of all, the bondage of my will, then gradually to see if it can be a little free of this bondage, and can I submit this will to the will of God or will of Krishna. It's actually, in fact, a very strong suggestion. Let me quote to you from a great Indian text, Shatapath Brahman. When a searcher knocks at the sun door, which is a way of saying coming to enlightenment, he will be asked, who is it? If the answer is anything other than nobody, he may not enter. So you see, the call is, can I gradually become nobody? Meaning not self-centered, self-willed, self-occupied. So self-will is a very large idea. I hope you would consider all this matter. Okay? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Anupam Mulbagal, you have some question about dharma. Would you like to state it yourself?
Yeah, good morning and good day to all people here. Raviji, I would just ask this: is dharma as prescribed in Buddhism and Hinduism different? Please, can you throw light on that?
Well, dharma, as you know, literally it has many different meanings. It can mean, for example, duty, responsibility, obligation. Actually, in Sanskrit, it can also mean law, it can mean order, it can also mean teaching. For example, in the context of Buddhism, particularly when it says Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, Dhammam Sharanam. Dhammam is just a Pali word for dharma. So Dharmam Sharanam Gacchami. There it is referring to that I submit myself to the teaching of the Buddha. So it has, first of all, many different meanings, not to get so easily attached to this. In fact, the suggestion, I'm sure you know that this sometimes is also used as law, but it can also mean support. The word dharati, which means the earth, has the same etymological root as the word dharma. So it's a very large idea, whole dharma. And in fact, ultimately, Krishna ends up saying, initially, he's asking Arjuna to stay with his dharma, meaning what is his responsibility, what is his duty, which he's saying, you are a kshatriya, you have to fight for justice, so you should fight. That's your dharma. But what does he say at the very end? Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam braj. Leave all these dharmas aside. Come only to me. I will deliver you from all evil. Now, dharma there can also mean you can leave all your responsibilities aside if you submit to God. He'll take care of it. Or you leave anything that supports you. This was one of the things which I was always very struck by in my conversation with Krishnamurti. Actually, I have occasionally said, I'm often invited by the Krishnamurti Foundations to give talks here. On one occasion, I actually said, which slightly created a bit of a scandal for them, that Krishnamurti's main contribution actually was to create a havoc. And they were very surprised. I said, because he wishes to take away all the supports, because that's what the scripture says. He says, I haven't read your scripture. Or that's what you said yesterday. That doesn't matter. I don't have to say the same thing. You know, what I'm saying is he was always completely willing to refuse any support that you ask for, whether it is tradition, whether it is scripture, or whether it is thinking, or what the scientists say, or anybody says, he would just dismiss it. Not because he's against any of them, but he's inviting us to, at that moment, to stay with what you see, what is true. So you see, dharma can mean many, many things. In the Buddhist literature also, one of the things, I said this to earlier friend who asked this question, everything has many levels. This is something we constantly forget. Human beings have many levels. Your own thinking has many levels. Sometimes you have a very clear thought. Sometimes I have no idea what the hell's going on. Sometimes I read the same page again in a book, and I'm surprised that this page was there earlier, as if earlier it didn't seem to be there. Similarly, dharma has many, many levels. What the Buddha himself personally would regard to be his responsibility at a particular time would be quite different from what he would have regarded when he was a prince. So each of these things need to be considered in its appropriate context. But it is generally now speaking at a very large kind of a level. Dharma in the Buddhist context ends up meaning the teaching of the Buddha. Whereas in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, generally it seems to mean one's particular responsibility in the context. And then right away you see that there can be different levels of dharma. For example, a very simple example I give, a CEO of a company has his dharma to raise the share price of the people, of the shareholders. But if he discovers that his company is producing something harmful for the planet, he also has some dharma for the planet, some responsibility for the planet. So now this can create a confusion. That was actually the crisis of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. How can he possibly fight his own teachers, his own cousins and uncles? This is against family dharma. Then Krishna points out that there are many levels of dharma, and a level of dharma at a higher level, its consequence may be different, or its action that is necessary may be different from the level of dharma at a lower level. Then what does one do? So what I'm trying to say to you, don't easily buy the meaning of word dharma. It has many different meanings, many different levels. So struggle in your own life. What is your dharma in any given context? Maybe right in this gathering here, what will be the appropriate dharma, your responsibility? I need to ask the same for myself. What is my dharma now, here? Thank you.
Thank you, Raviji. Thank you, Raviji, for your wise words.
Ketan Mankikar, I think, I'm sorry. I think you've written a question out here on chat, but it'll be nice to hear it in your voice. Please.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. Good evening, everyone. Namaste, Raviji. So the question is, at the start, you mentioned about, the sensations in the body, right? You mentioned about focus on the sensation and not on the emotion. So how do you identify those sensations? What are those sensations we should look at? Is it maybe when we are meditating, the numbness that we get, or is it we concentrate on the heartbeat? So what are these sensations, if you can guide us on that? Thank you.
There are many different kinds of sensations in our body, which you have already even mentioned a couple of them yourself. First of all, a simple reminder, actually very explicitly, this is made a remark by Sri Amirvan. Some of you may know. He was a great sage in India, died only in 1978, I think, or 77, something like that. This is a remark of his, that even the highest spiritual experience is a sensation in the body. It's a direct quote from him. See, what we tend to forget, mind does not experience. Don't easily buy it. This is actually true, even in the scientific realm. All the measurements in science are made by externalized senses. How high the thermometer, how high the mercury is in a thermometer, or any other instrument. But there is no need to be against the mind. Then the mind can look at various measurements, and a great scientist can suggest one theory that will incorporate them all, or even suggest other experiments should be made to find out if this is true. But the mind itself does not experience. This is a very important thing to keep in mind. All experience is by feeling or by sensation. In spiritual matters, it is internalized sensation. You can even close your eyes, for example, and say, I see what is taking place. Seeing there doesn't mean ordinary seeing. So, therefore, first of all, keeping this in mind, the reason for emphasizing sensation is to come back to relying on your experience. Take again a very simple example. In fact, one of the very strong conversation I had with Krishnamurti was exactly about this issue. Every impression changes our body at a cellular level. You look at somebody with affection, and guaranteedly the quality of your breathing will change. You can then try to look at the same person with a sense of hatred. Watch the change in your breathing. And the change in the quality of breathing also means changes the body at a cellular level. So then, strong recommendation in any spiritual search to become more and more sensitive to my body so that I can see what is taking place. If one says, I'm visited by Krishna, how does one know this? Is Krishna walking around or playing his flute standing on one leg, or what is he doing? Experiencing Krishna is a bodily sensation and a feeling. So I think to take therefore to become more and more interested, I always suggest really, if I am struck by, let us say, some idea in physics or some piece of music being played by Mozart, that doesn't mean now suddenly I'm at the level of Mozart. I need to undertake the practice seriously. So if this notion, which I just quoted to you from Sri Anirvan, that even the highest spiritual experience is a sensation in the body, if I don't want to simply dismiss it, then one would see, how do I cultivate subtler and subtler sensation? Because that is really the practice. Otherwise, I can buy the idea, and then even my shirt touching my arm has a sensation, but that's hardly what's going to bring me spiritual experience, just because my shirt. So therefore, to then see that what Sri Anirvan may have experienced is not going to be easily experienced by me, or what the Buddha experienced, or what Christ experienced. It's going to take a large practice. Unless, of course, I sometimes joke about it. In California, of course, you can take a weekend workshop and you can be enlightened. But that's not true in India. It takes many lifetimes. Even the Buddha took many lifetimes. You know this. Jataka tales tell his many lifetimes. So don't be in a way in such a hurry to figure this out. But if the idea a little bit speaks to you, when I say speaks to you, because we hear many things, not everything strikes us as significant. But if something you feel, well, my goodness, that may be worth trying, then undertake this, first of all, to begin to watch how long can you stay with any sensation, and begin very simply, just watch or to become aware. I use the word watch because we end up, that's the language problem. But to really be more and more aware of, let us say, the sensation in your right arm. If it is true, what Krishna said. Now, of course, we can dismiss all this, but personally, I never find it very helpful. Krishna actually says that I am seated in the body. Now, is he just telling a lie? If I don't dismiss it, then I say, how the hell do I actually sense Krishna in my right arm? Now, that's quite different from my shirt touching my right arm. So to sense that now would require more and more sensitivity and repeated practice. But just in case you don't actually, maybe some of you may not know this, this is in the 17th chapter where he says, let me quote to you from the Bhagavad Gita. Those who undertake severe austerities torture not only themselves, they torture me, who is seated in their body. This is Krishna saying this. Shrirast is the Sanskrit expression. So don't dismiss the idea. but undertake this as a practice. Okay.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks. Thank you.
Sir, are you okay to take a couple of questions more? It's already 7, but there are
As
questions.
far as I'm concerned, it nourishes my soul to have questions. But you decide. You people are the organizers. I have to submit myself to this.
We submit to your submission, sir. Well, I think Anand Anam, you have a question?
No, there was not a question. I just wanted to record a sensation during the meditation. It was kind of shocking and it was very, it happened suddenly. It happened suddenly that all these 20 years I was hearing axis, and in that moment I saw something about it, and it was unbelievable. I don't know how sudden it happened in a magical moment. Just a moment before I thought I'm dreaming or what, but suddenly I was, it was different. I was full of gratitude. So I raised my hand. This is getting recorded. I'm going to forget this, but just for recording and say my thanks to all of us coming together. So that is not a question.
Okay. Thank you for mentioning that, Anand.
Vishnu Kant. Is Vishnu around? I can't see.
Yeah, I'm here.
Please.
Raviji, I want to express my gratitude. It's a blessing to have been here. I wonder if you remember. Yeah, remember me. All right, am I heard? Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
please
can
go
you
on.
hear me?
Yes, yes,
All
please
right,
go on.
yeah. So just wanted to say that one thing that has stayed with me, and Raviji did it, expresses today as well, the attention is the only thing that has the power to transform things. Okay, something that I have stayed with, it has stayed with me, and I've worked with it. And in times, there have been times when certain things have contributed to invigorate my attention. The times where, so I just wanted to ask, and this could be probably anybody who could share, but directed to Raviji, is that from your vast experience of a lot of practices across the world, is there anything specific that you could suggest which has a more sustainable yes, kind of which works to sustain and maybe sharpen attention as one kind of progresses on the path?
Well, a remark which may initially seem completely theoretical. First of all, personally, I find increasingly the word awareness more helpful than attention. The reason behind that is attention, certainly its usual English usage, carries very much the impression it's my attention. Awareness has also a little bit of the implication that I become aware of something which is not being originated from me, which is, after all, really the fundamental spiritual idea that this particle of divinity that has taken on my body mind, how can I allow the consciousness or the awareness of that in me rather than my attention. So really the direction therefore to pursue, naturally we begin from where we are. So I begin from my attention. But gradually, can I in fact find more and more listening, receiving awareness. So awareness in me, but not my awareness. To allow that requires more and more relaxation. When I say submitting to something, it's not ordinary kind of meaning of submitting, but closer word will be receptivity. Strong suggestion in all spiritual teachings, particularly emphasized in the Quran, more so than elsewhere, that God is more anxious to connect with us than we are to connect with God. Now, it may or may not be true, but that's what the scriptures actually say. So if I allow the possibility that this may be true, how do I become more and more receptive rather than active? Of course, something is required from my side to be receptive. So it's really what I often call not activity and passivity, but active receptivity. Otherwise, for example, I can be deeply relaxed if I have a large glass of whiskey, but that doesn't allow me, it's not the kind of relaxation that is still receiving something. So relaxation, which is actively able to receive something, but not only physical relaxation, emotional relaxation, intellectual relaxation, freedom from whatever I know. That is actually more important, so that I can actually, in fact, be surprised. If you look at any of the experiences described by great sages, for example, Ramana Maharishi in contemporary times, or Aurobindo, unless their experience surprises them, it is not likely to be true, because it is likely to be still made by my mind. So how am I going to be surprised? Because I wasn't expecting this, I wasn't demanding this, but I am receptive to whatever is taking place. So that's the direction to see, if you can. Does it, any of this make any sense?
Yes, I like the thing that if it isn't surprise, then it could be creation of my own mind.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very interesting one.
Yes.
It's new, very new. That surprises me.
Good.
Nice.
Rishabh Mehta, you have a question about our significance in the cosmos. Would you like to ask it yourself? Rishabh?
I don't see anybody by that name here.
Maybe he dropped out. Okay, Deepa Kiran. Who else?
Yeah, I do not have the video. I won't be able to switch on.
That's okay.
Right. Yeah, I just stated that it's something that's been coming back to me the last, I think, in the recent times, which is what really is considered to be the origin of thought.
Association. We associate one thing with the other. Most of our thought is driven by that. Again, don't simply buy what I'm saying or what anybody is saying, including even Krishna. Try to see if that is actually true in your own experience. Which is why I repeatedly keep saying that one of the troubles, religions, in my judgment, have done more harm to spiritual search than any other institution. simply because they want you to just believe something or keep doing this or that, rather than actually trying to be a good searcher, questioning. But if you read, Krishna is inviting us to do that, exactly that. But we can even quote that and then just say, oh, well, that's what Krishna said. So don't easily buy this, but to search if that is true for you. Okay.
Thank you.
And one last question. I hope it's not the last question of the people here, but it's the last question for this session. Rananjay Pandey, what is the name? Rananjay Pandey, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Guruji, thank you so much. It's really been such a profound experience just listening to you. My question is about since you've had such being with great masters like J. Krishnamurti and also deeply being going into the work of Vedanta and Gurdjieff and so many other paths that you followed. One thing that I heard somewhere is enlightenment is in fact easy. What is more difficult is to let go of the attachments, to drop the attachments to life, to my enlightenment, and all of that. My question to you, Raviji, is you've been a seeker and you've diligently followed the path, and sought the truth. I just want to uh, ask you what is worth seeking, and what have you found in your spiritual quest?
What is worth seeking really for each one of us is, if I don't dismiss this overall idea that a particle of spirit or of divinity or Krishna has taken on this body, what is worth seeking is, how do I become more and more aware of, or how do I listen more and more what this particle really wishes my body and mind to do? That certainly does not mean that the body and mind doesn't have its own requirements and needs. I know there is always a tendency, people get fed up with the body mind, so they want to join a monastery, not do anything in the world. Or Shankara in particular, who has created more problem in India than almost anybody else, in my judgment. Only Brahma is Satya and Jagat is Mithya. This is his remark. Krishna takes incarnation repeatedly in order to enhance the quality of dharma in the world. Why the hell would he do this if this world doesn't mean anything? Why would he ask Arjuna to undertake the fighting if it doesn't mean anything? So in a way, this whole emphasis that got placed as if this world can be just ignored, it's irrelevant, is completely stupid. And then to see that my body mind is really miniaturized world or miniaturized prakriti, it is meant to be the instrument to assist the evolution of this particle of Krishna. Then why to be against the instrument? The instrument actually needs to be sharpened. It needs to be prepared so it can actually help. I occasionally actually say this to people. It sounds, don't get too carried away with this. Only the rich can practice poverty. The poor have no choice. Can you imagine how many people in India do you think are willing to spend enough time, enough money, enough energy to be able to join anything worthwhile? Most people are just being driven by ordinary requirements of survival or competing with each other. So when one realizes this, then one begins to see that the call really is to begin to question more and more, why have I been created? And what does this particle of the spirit, which is what all the sages say, has taken on my body? How can I listen to it? How can I try to carry out what this particle wants? That's the general direction. Now, I should make maybe two sort of remarks. Is this intended to be the closing remarks here, Anuradha?
Yes, sir.
Then
If
one
one
thing
question may be permitted, please.
Yes,
Sir,
please.
yes.
There are some other pre-closing remarks that are coming, Raviji, which you'll have to probably take. Is it okay? Is it
Only a
okay?
very short question, please.
That's fine. Yes.
Raviji, namaskar.
Namaskar.
Yes, the point is you seem to be trying to present an eclectic view. You are trying to talk about Krishna, Buddha, Aurobindo, Shankara, and everybody. But generally, people have this contention that the Buddhism, the view of anatta, is very radically different from the Atma concept of Upanishads. How do you reconcile these two views? Is the truth one and the same, or the Buddhist realization is entirely different from the Upanishadic realization? Please throw some light on this.
This is going to be a very long subject. I recommend to you a book by Anand Kumaraswamy, not a negligible scholar, who was actually born in a Buddhist family. The book is called something like Hinduism and Buddhism. That's the overall title, where he actually speaks about that they are speaking about almost exactly the same things. Similarly, another book that I will recommend to you is by the great scholar in India, T.S.M. Murthy, who was a scholar at the Varanasi University. Actually, in the scholarly world, after Radhakrishnan, he was the most regarded, highest scholar. He wrote a book on Buddhism. And he actually said to me, Buddhism is Hinduism for export. Because people don't realize Hindu is not an Indian word. This is just really referring to the river Sindhu, which somehow got pronounced as Hindu by the Persians, and later on became Indus River, so from where we get the word India. So nobody knows what a Hindu is, strictly speaking. It's just a geographical term. But in order for it to go outside India, it required Buddhism. So this is his remark. T.R.V. Murthy. I was trying to recall his initial spelling. You can read that book. Buddhism is Hinduism for export. Many things are common. Of course, on the other hand, it is true, particularly after Buddhism went to China, that is more or less 2,000 years ago. Then, because elsewhere, for example, going to Sri Lanka or Thailand or Burma, these are relatively speaking small countries, smaller cultures. So the Indian culture more or less overwhelmed them. But in China, Chinese culture is not so negligible. It's very ancient. And their Buddhism went through a bit of a change. I give a very simple example of the kind of change. First of all, the change from Theravada Buddhism, which used to be called Hinayana, to Mahayana. That is an important shift. Earlier, according to the Theravada idea, you had to be a monk, and no women were allowed to be monks to begin with. Only the monks could possibly go to nirvana. But this shifted in Mahayana Buddhism. Now, to be sure, it's not that no philosophers in India, but Nagarjuna was the main person behind all this. Then the other shift, even in the Buddhist monasteries in India, all physical work was done by volunteers. The monks were not doing it. But in China, physical work is regarded as quite a reasonable thing to do. So that shifted. And in fact, by the time Buddhism went from China via Vietnam, Korea to Japan, in Zen Buddhism, usually the second highest monk is a cook. This will be impossible in the Indian context. So I say some of these things are cultural backgrounds. So there is a shift. After Buddhism went to China, particularly, there is some shift that takes place in many attitudes, even the clothing. And by the time, of course, Buddhism went to California, Buddhist monks, they wear jeans. You may be surprised. People often don't realize this. And so but that has been, personally for me, what has been rather interesting, that the movement of Buddhism has been always eastward from India. From India, Thailand, Korea, China, etc., Japan, California, that has been the movement. Whereas actually Christianity spread the other way around. But in any case, that's a slightly different matter. But coming back to your question here, obviously, in a way, whatever we mean by Hinduism, I can guaranteedly every Hindu is different from another Hindu. So similarly, of course, there is shifts and changes in Buddhism and Hinduism. Why not? Particularly when something gets established, a particular scripture gets more and more emphasized, or a particular practice. So there are differences. In fact, there is a very lovely little poem of William Blake talking about Christianity. He's talking about, your Christ is different from mine. Mine has a straight nose, yours has a crooked nose like thine. If you look at the images of the Buddha in Japan, you'll be absolutely amazed that Buddhism started in India. So this is inevitable. So one can, on the other hand, in general, one of the underlying ideas behind any advancement in one's understanding is to begin to see more and more unity in things rather than separation. I am guaranteedly here that if Raman Maharshi were to invited to speak about Buddha, he would see much more the commonality rather than the differences.
Wonderful, agree.
Yeah. So one begins to see more and more differences. This is part of the analytical mind. Buddhi, on the other hand, the same root as the word Buddha, has a different context. So, not therefore, differences can be sometimes helpful. Different people need slightly different emphasis. So there's no reason to be against the differences, but to imagine that ultimately, I'm, for example, always very struck. Christ says, the Father and I are one. Personally, I never heard anybody in India refer to God as the Father. They would often refer to him as Mother, but not as the Father. But therefore, should we dismiss that he doesn't know what he's talking about? He's gender oriented. Is it different from saying Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahma? So question really is, do we see something which is coming to more and more a universally common view of great reality and our separation from this? You know, the only one person I know historically who actually seems to have practiced different religious tradition was Ramakrishna. Some of you may know this. He actually undertook at that time, Buddhism in India is just regarded part of Hinduism. I have never heard any Hindu dismiss the Buddha. Often people don't realize, let me remind you, Vivekananda, who is said to be the Hindu monk of India, his Ishta Devata was the Buddha, not Ramakrishna. Take my word for it. So Buddha is not, he's regarded as one of the incarnations of Vishnu, actually, in the Hindu tradition. So nobody would dismiss the Buddha in India. But it is true that elsewhere, these separations get made. But the remark that I just wanted to make here was that if one follows any particular teaching, which Ramakrishna at that time, Buddhism was not a separate religion, or Jainism or Sikhism. So he practiced Islam and Christianity. These were the only two other, if you like, major religions. And his conclusion was that they're leading to the same goal. Personally, for me, I can't say this from my experience, but it makes more sense to me intellectually. Ramakrishna is the only one I know who could possibly say that from his experience in the whole of human history. So why dismiss him?
Thank you. Thank you. So your conclusion is the truth realized by the Buddha and the Upanishadic seers is more or less one and the same. Is it your conclusion?
Well, no, I think it's good to actually also see some of the difference. For example, in the Buddhist literature, you would see more and more emphasis on shunyata, emptiness. Whereas in the Upanishadic tradition, you will see more and more on fullness rather than emptiness. But I remember, here I'd give you an example of, I was very close to Roshi Kabori, who was the head of Rinzai Zen in Japan. I spent a lot of time in the Zen monasteries there.
Rinzai school, okay.
And I asked him at one stage, how would he translate shunyata? I said, it's always translated as emptiness or nothingness. He said, as far as I'm concerned, it should really be translated as illumination. Now, no scholar could possibly agree with this. You know, shunyata simply comes from the word shunya, meaning zero, zeroness. But he's speaking from his experience. Similarly, you see how the words one can get so attached to. So one is speaking. Now, what does fullness mean? Any description you give of Brahma is neti neti, not this, not this. So one could say it's shunya description. So the reason I'm saying all this, that one can get so attached to one particular expression of the idea. What is the experience of the people? And any Buddhist monk, or usually it's monks, but not always, any Buddhist who actually experience something true is full of compassion, full of gratitude. Is he empty of this? So why get carried away with these words? I just want to make a couple of remarks just to close this here. One is, I actually invite everybody to get more and more interested in the journey rather than in the destination. Even the Buddha refused to describe what nirvana is, but simply because it can't be described. So whatever notion we have of the destination, enlightenment, God, Brahma, nirvana, it's just man-made, it's mind-made destination. So to become more and more interested in the journey, one step forward, two steps back, one step on the side, then everything is adventurous and is interesting. So that's one of my recommendations. Don't get so attached to the destination. The other thing, that the mystery will always remain. Spiritual mysteries, even in principle, cannot be solved. And here, since most of you are from the Indian origin here, I give you an example. A poem written by Rabindranath Tagore. There is nobody in India who would not know his name, so I don't need to mention this. He wrote this only 13 days before his death in Bengali, which was his mother tongue. But I will say this in English. In the beginning of my life, with the first rays of the rising sun, I asked, who am I? Now at the end of my life, with the last rays of the setting sun, I ask, who am I? The mystery remains, but the mystery changes one's life. So to stay with the mystery, who am I? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raviji. In the next couple of weeks, some of the people here will be joining us through different experiences that we'll be having. And I was wondering, I know you've made your closing remarks, but still, like the Shruti note or the Sa note, which supports a melody, as an element of practice as we enter each of these other sessions, what would you suggest? How does one keep this question with us during this time?
To listen with as much care and attention as you can. But I always say, whether you are reading a scripture or listening to whether they're scholars or sages, always ask this question, how does it apply to me? How can I, in that sense, go from my experience? At the same time, also to remember, and this brings a kind of a paradox, At the same time, to remember that what I can experience today, I hope will be at a different level after 2 years of practice or 5 years of practice or 5 lifetimes of practice. That means not wholly to rely on my present experience, but does something speak to me in the direction of experience? So it's a very paradoxical perspective that I'm bringing here, to rely on my experience, but not wholly to be attached to that, to see the direction of that, of feeling behind it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, everybody, and hope to see some of you soon on Saturday.
God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raviji.
Thank you, everyone who organized this. It's a beautiful offering.
Thanks, everyone.